Look, I missed an anniversary. In fact, I wasn't on air. I was in the air when a very, very sad anniversary rolled round on the 24th of March. It is the third, or was on Monday, the third anniversary of the beginning of the war in Ukraine. And if you remember back to those days, suddenly reports of a massive Russian offensive. And gosh, it seems like only yesterday. Remember that island where the Russian warship was going to fire and they said, F you, Russian warship. The Russian commandos landing at the airport and Ukraine fighting back and it not being a walkover. And a conflict now which has gone on for 3 years that is maybe not as trendy or as headline grabbing as it once was. But a conflict now where President Trump's taken a very strange position and things are changing and moving. But a war that Russia has not won, nor can it win, but a war clearly sapping and costing the lives of people in Ukraine. We have at various times in the last 3 years spoken to our next guest, Kate Tesker. She's a spokesperson for a group called Mahi for Ukraine, which helps people in Ukraine seeking respite in New Zealand from the conflict and provides support for Ukrainians in New Zealand and indeed back home in Ukraine. Kate Tesker joins us again now. Kate, good to talk to you again, but disappointing to talk to you 2 days past a very, very sad anniversary.
Good morning, Sean. Indeed, it is. When we hold our rallies every year, people tell us hopefully we won't have to do it next year again. And this Sunday, here we were again at Salah Park rallying to support Ukraine.
Yeah, look, things have got very weird. I've been in Europe. I got back on Monday and watched the absolute confusion amongst European politicians in European countries and NATO members as Donald Trump pursues a very, very strange, it would seem, strategy with Ukraine. How do you feel about Trump's slightly bizarre new approach?
Oh, look, Ukrainians feel betrayed. We're in absolute shock, and of course we're worried about that. We feel like the tactics that Trump chosen to negotiate with the aggressor rather than support the victim, and his plan, you know, he calls it negotiating peace. Let's be very critical of that word on offer because this is not peace. And negotiating anything about Ukraine without Ukraine isn't diplomacy, it's appeasement. It legitimizes Russia's aggression, it sidelines the victim, and frankly, it sets a very dangerous precedent for the world. So here in New Zealand, as well as all around the world, Ukrainians are appalled by that. We cannot believe the rhetoric that comes out of his mouth, the fact that he is blatantly parroting Russian propaganda now. And of course, forcing Ukraine to accept a backroom deal without security guarantees is not going to bring peace. In fact,
it's almost as if he's trying to negotiate Ukraine's surrender.
Absolutely. It's not only morally bankrupt, but it's strategically naive. There is nothing that ever brought peace when it came to appeasement. You know, appeasing Putin doesn't work. We know that. It's been proven ineffective time and time again. 2008, NATO hesitated to grant Ukraine and Georgia a clear path to membership because they feared Russian reaction. And what we had happen is Georgia got invaded 6 months later and Ukraine 6 years later. And the U.S. reset in 29 failed. Minsk Accords in 2014 failed. It doesn't stop Russian aggression. We know this.
Yeah. Kate, the problem is and we've been talking this morning about another issue where if you can sell a lie, a whole lot of bad things can flow from it. Trump is clearly trying to paint, and I couldn't believe this. I mean, your country's been Ukraine's been under martial law because there is a war going on. You can't hold an election in those circumstances. But Trump now saying that Zelensky is the dictator, and even that Ukraine was the aggressor in this war, which is just so blatantly untrue. The danger is when someone like Trump starts selling a big lie like that, it can in fact convince some people, and the kind of cooker conspiracy theorists of the world suddenly become experts and they turn reality on its head. Have Trump's weird pronouncements, are they having some effect and a damaging effect on Ukraine and on Zelensky?
I mean, Ukraine's position has been strong on this, and of course, Russia invaded Ukraine, not the other way around, and was an unprovoked invasion. Russia bears full responsibility for its aggression, and similarly so with the whole dictator accusations. We know that the issue of the election in Ukraine is legal; it's not political. We know that under martial law, elections are prohibited. And we know that Europe has reaffirmed its support for Ukraine and for President Zelensky. Ukrainians are united, if anything, after these announcements. Of course, there's a lot of people in Ukraine who might not like the president, who might vote differently when the elections do come around. But when it comes to speaking about Ukraine as a dictatorship, that is absolute nonsense. Ukraine remains a democracy. Elections and leadership transitions are established practices. And, when you look at Russia, Russia has been under the rule of a legitimate dictator for 25 years who has rigged the constitution.
Yeah.
He suppressed free media, murdered opponents. So when we talk about dictatorship, we have to look squarely at Russia. But Ukrainians are obviously deeply, deeply offended by this and, like I said, in shock and in disbelief. But at the end of the day, of course, there'll be people who will be following false narratives. And that's why we keep saying that it's more than ever important to ensure that we're vigilant and that we're battling the propaganda. And, when we hear something like this, we have to call it out. This is not new. Russian propaganda, it isn't new.
No, I get that. But also we have to live in a very real world. And Kate, I must say, going up to London and being close to Europe, I suddenly realised how much more real for people the conflict in Ukraine is. Is there an acceptance, though, and it might be difficult for you to say this, that really after 3 years it looks like no side can in a military sense win this conflict? That at the end of the day, for peace to come, there is going to have to be compromise on both sides, and that may involve some territory being ceded to the Russians. Do you think Ukraine could live with that, ceding some territory as long as hostilities end and their security is guaranteed?
Well, I mean,
actually, I'm going to ask you, how would you feel about that? Is really the question I'm asking you.
I'd say that I would feel that would be an absolutely wrong choice. When we talk about war, it's not a choice between war versus peace. You have to remember that it's a war versus extermination choice. You can Google Bucha massacre. You can look at various other examples of what happens when the Russians occupy Ukrainian territory. So this is what people forget to acknowledge. It isn't just about changing a flag or paying taxes to a different government. It means mass executions on the occupied territories, imprisoning millions of Ukrainians who refuse to submit, systematic erasure of Ukrainian identity, torture, and then once the bloodshed is done, indoctrination will begin. And in a decade, those who will survive will be turned into soldiers for Russia, and they will go and join Russia's next war, potentially against Europe or something like this. I don't believe ceding territories is the right thing to do, and absolutely do not believe it brings about peace.
Yeah. Kate, I don't want to upset you. I want to read, and this is where I think misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, I want to read some of the texts I've got, and I just want to warn you, they're not all nice.
Fair enough.
So here's one. Zelensky was a Democratic Biden pawn. Trump is getting at the Dems. That's what his stance is about. Sorry, Sean, I can't listen to this propaganda and misinformation. Absolutely not. Zelensky should stick to playing the piano with his, and that's a rude word. Sean, stick to local affairs. With the shift in narrative with Ukraine, you're starting to sound like a crazy cooker. The Ukraine can rot in hell just like Palestine. You have fallen down the media rabbit hole once again, Sean. Now, those are the sort of texts I wouldn't have got a year ago, Kate. And they kind of worry me. Is there a danger that the Trump narrative will change, even in a country as far away as New Zealand, public attitudes towards the conflict?
Well, we'll have to look at, obviously, by and large, there's still support for Ukraine in the public.